Hello, Sarah. Thank you so
Uh,
much for being with us today. We're really very grateful. It's extremely exciting for us on this day at our church, All Saints Church in Chelsea Beecham, as we are celebrating the lives of David Melville and his daughter May Gaskell and her relationship with Edward Burne-Jones. It's fantastic to have someone with us who knows so much and is able to share with us some fascinating insights into the artwork that Edward Burne-Jones made for May and actually of May. That's really fantastic. So um, we've been sharing so far some details of the letters that Burne-Jones wrote to May and also to Daphne and to David and to Amy. So we are fascinated actually to see the range and the scope of output that Burne-Jones created for May and of May. There's a real range from the very finest portraiture done of Amy down to the sort of really quite fun cartoons and caricatures that he created in the letters he wrote to the family, but also the some of the simpler but still equally beautiful pencil sketches and drawings that he did of David Melville and of May herself. So welcome to the festival and thank you so much. We'd be delighted to hear more about you and your experience with the Pre-Raphaelites and also then to learn more about the artwork.
okay, thank you, Holly. Well, hello, everybody. As you know, my name is Sarah Waters, and I have been immersed in the study of the Pre-Raphaelites, probably I would say from birth, actually. My father, Bill Waters, has been making study of Burne-Jones's life and work since he was in his early 20s, late teens, early 20s. So he's now in his 80s, so that's 60 years. He's written several books on the subject, probably the most famous being the classic monograph of 1973, Burne-Jones, which really catapulted public awareness of the artist's work back into the centre of Pre-Raphaelite studies. So I've been immersed in it really, and it's an interesting thing when you grow up in a world surrounded by people talking about the Pre-Raphaelites, studying the Pre-Raphaelites, even dealing in Pre-Raphaelite artworks. You kind of take them for granted. So one of the things that I did when I went to university to study history of art, I then wanted to specialise and went on to the University of London in 1990 to study under Joe Morden Crook. And I specialise in Victorian art and architecture. And part of the endeavour that I undertook during that course was to establish what I already knew from what I didn't know and give the prior knowledge a context. Because now I work at Tully House Museum and Art Gallery. I have a phenomenal collection of Pre-Raphaelite artworks up there in Carlisle. Really internationally significant by all the names: Rossetti's, Burne-Jones, Madox Brown. We've got drawings by William Morris. We've got Arthur Hughes, who wasn't actually a member of the PRB, but was very closely associated with it. And of course, George Howard lived in and enjoyed living in Narworth Castle, which is just down the road. And George Howard was a very great friend of Burne-Jones. So Burne-Jones and Morris came up here and they all designed St Martin's Church up here. So we have a gem of a Philip Webb architect designed church filled with Morris and Company stained glass just down the road. So we're immersed in Pre-Raphaelitism up here in Carlisle and second generation. And what I do as well as that is I work online with my father and a gentleman called Peter Nahum on www.eb-j.org, which is the online catalogue raisonné. And we have catalogued up to now, I think we have 11,000 images online. And we catalogue anything to do with Burne-Jones, his life, his work, his studio output, people's collections, collectors. We try and document as much as possible, and it's all free, so anybody can go online and access this information. And on a weekly basis, sometimes daily, I'm working on it, and my father and I are helping or trying to catalogue, identify, and sort of comment on scraps, all sorts of things. Burne-Jones is phenomenally industrious. Things are turning up on a weekly basis, new things that we haven't seen. It's incredible. You'd think after all this time we'd know about everything, and that everything would be in museums or documented in private collections, and it just isn't. It's still coming out, and it's always, what was it done for? Where has it been? What's its provenance? And how does it enhance what we know about the work that it was made for? And we're doing that all the time. And every day is fascinating. And we're finding new stories all the time. So to be invited to come and speak today about May, as she was known, as you all know, Helen Mary Gaskell, and her relationship with Burne-Jones is superb. And now I'm going to attempt to launch into my short lecture in a moment, but I'm going to try and screen share so that you've got some lovely images to look at, not just me. So if you bear with me, I'm going to attempt to do that now. Yeah, that everything's working. Okay, so here we have Edward Burne-Jones. He wasn't a baronet at this point. This was taken in 1890. He's looking very grand. He's aged 57 years, and it's 2 years before he met Helen Mary Gaskell. He stood on his studio steps in front of, as I've said, the Star of Bethlehem. This was at the time, and remains, the largest watercolour painting ever created. And it's on display in Birmingham City Art Gallery. So when they reopen, I think they've given it a clean, they've condition checked it, and they've revealed a signature that was hidden for 100 years. So when Birmingham opens, go and see it, because it's the most vast but beautiful, beautiful watercolour of the Adoration of the Magi. At this time, he was at the height of his fame, was extremely highly regarded as one of England's finest painters, and he'd exhibited on the continent and was widely feted there. His art notably influencing the artists of the Symbolist movement. He was an extremely highly educated and well-read and charming man who throughout his life adored women. Sadly, his mother had died shortly after giving birth to him, and his father blamed the baby for the loss. He remained inconsolable for the rest of his life, and the child carried this. Burne-Jones always carried this with him. So he felt the absence acutely, so naturally sought female company as he grew and when he became an adult. He married Georgiana MacDonald in 1860. This is Georgiana on the left, about the time she got married. She's so petite there. And then there is a portrait of her that the artist made later in the 1880s, holding a book open. It looks like it's a medieval herbal, and there's a sprig of heartsease in it, which is about looking after the heart, the love focus there. He thrived in female company, and Georgiana was one of 4 sisters, and we think, and it looks like the way his relationship with the 4 sisters was so positive, we think he was probably a little in love with all of them, but married Georgie. They had 2 children that survived into adulthood, but they did lose one baby, Christopher. He lived only for a few weeks. And Georgie was very ill at the time, which frightened them both terribly. And so their marriage changed slightly after that, although they were very happily married up until that point. She was also very well read, musical, extremely intelligent, very, very wise. And they remained together and married for the rest of their lives. She managed his financial affairs, maintained the domestic structure and stability that he required to work. However, in 1865, he met Maria Zambarco, this lady on the left. She was a a member of the affluent Greek colony in London, and she and Edward engaged on a life-changing and passionate affair. Her influence took his art to a whole new level of brilliance, and he produced some of his finest work drawing her. It's widely accepted that the affair lasted for 4 years, but there is definitely evidence that it lasted a lot longer. We know that they had adjacent studios in Hampstead in the 1880s, and Father and I have also identified a late drawing from about 1888. We think it's Maria reading. So that's a long time after 1865. But here we have drawn in 1873 as Desiderium. I think this is one of the most beautiful drawings he ever produced. We're very lucky in that it is held by the Tate, so you can go and see it. And it's exquisitely modelled, and she looks so, so beautiful. You can feel Rossetti's influence in this drawing, the neck like a tower and those very, very full lips, but taken to a whole new dimension with Burne-Jones's obsession with Maria. He was an incredible creative force, and he strived constantly to be inventive and reinventive. And indeed, he astounded all who knew him by his original creativity, and it never ceasing. No two designs were ever alike. And he believed with his friend William Morris that his calling was to beautify the world. And it's exactly what they set out to do. And this was the motivation behind Morris and Company, and through this firm they gained the commissions and became church furnishers. Burne-Jones particularly valued beauty, and he repeatedly drew Maria, and her face appears in paintings throughout his career and in stained glass windows. You see her everywhere once you get your eye in and start spotting the features. He also drew William Morris's daughters, May and Jenny, and they appear as the angels in the Angels of Creation, a series of the creation myth that were made for stained glass windows and then made into paintings. And he also met the daughter when she was about 14, 15 of his Scottish patron William Graham. And now this was Frances. Here she is on the far left with her sister. And when he met Frances, he absolutely fell for her. She was a very charming teenage girl. He thought her exquisitely beautiful. She was intelligent. They had wonderful conversations. And she then became another face in his art throughout the 1870s and beyond. And it's interesting because you see this portrait of Frances is very, very like. Burne-Jones does idealize faces, but in a way that so captures the genuine quality of the sitter. He idolized his muses, and the faces in his hands, I feel, become sort of elevated and stylized. He distills out and refines their qualities that he saw in life and when they were animated. And Burne-Jones has definitely two marked types of portraiture. He has the literal portraiture, and I'm sure today that you've seen his drawings of Canon Melville, the aged man, face full of wrinkles and wise understanding. He didn't flinch from age, but he was quite literal and capable of being quite so. But he decided in his paintings that there was a removal, and he would elevate the faces. They often meld the things that he saw that were beautiful in Frances, that he saw that were beautiful in Maria, in the Morris girls. He would sort of blend together and distill out, and you get this facial type that begins to appear. But also they become androgynous because he sought the same sort of vision of beauty in his male protagonists. So you get this feminine quality in his male characters, which is fascinating. It's also very confusing and bemusing. Frances often visited the artist's studio and became a confidant friend, and he adored her and showered her with gifts. Nothing was too extravagant for her, and he demonstrated his love for her consistently. As a woman, she grew up, and he was always offering her wise and sage advice, and a little bit flirtatious as well. He loved teenage girls. He loved the way they sort of encapsulated this sort of time before they embarked upon a public life in society. And The Golden Stairs is a very, very famous painting of this galaxy of beauties coming down the stairs, all young girls, at a wedding event, and they're all the not engaged young girls who aren't getting married. So 20 years later or so, Frances introduced Burne-Jones to a friend of hers. I apologise for the quality of this photograph. I'm sure you've seen better versions today. But this is Helen Mary Gaskell, of course. She was a fellow soul with Frances, and she was approaching 40, mother of 3, a society hostess noted for her charm and intellect. Just a side note, the Souls were an affluent group of aristocrats and well-to-do people who were drawn to each other's company to the exclusion of those outside it. And they absolutely worshipped Burne-Jones, and they moved in elite circles, and they included people like Arthur Balfour, who was to become Prime Minister, Violet Manners, then to become the Duchess of Rutland, Frances Graham, and Helen Mary, known as May. Burne-Jones immediately took to her, and they began corresponding pretty much instantly. As a middle-aged mother, though, she bucked the trend in his choice of female friends. He noticed a sadness in her, and he responded to it. Damsels in need of distress was something that his chivalric yearning couldn't resist. And the subsequent relationship that developed between them was, as we know from the letters that I gather that you've seen, completely and utterly remarkable. He began a portrait of her around 1893, and this is it. One of the fascinating things about Burne-Jones, though he was constantly drawing people, he was notoriously reluctant to paint portraits, especially commissioned society portraits. He just didn't want to do them. And the portraits that we have are of people that he knew very well, his intimate circle, and of their children, because he adored children. There are the exceptions. There's a portrait of Lady Windsor. There's a portrait of a French baroness. And he doesn't particularly write fondly about the experience of painting them. He always feels bullied into doing it. So he didn't do it out of a love for portraiture at all, which makes the portrait of Helen and the subsequent portrait of Amy even more special. Now, this portrait, it remained unfinished. The face is highly resolved. She looks directly at you. She's got a very soft, sympathetic face. And this painting reveals absolutely nothing of the burgeoning passion that Burne-Jones was beginning to feel for her. I mean, she looks almost matronly and slightly resigned in this portrait, a bit like the one of, if I flick back and we just compare it with the one of Georgie, this kind of resigned, quiet look, those all-knowing eyes. Just take you through again. There's that kind of knowingness in the eyes. But it remains unfinished, and my father suggests that he gave up on it because he realised, as he was painting it, that it didn't express what he felt about her. And I'd like to quote my father. He says, "This painting dates from the early period of the relationship between the artist and the sitter. Its unfinished state points to this. As their intimacy grew, its objectivity was no longer satisfactory. In a very short time, the depth of Burne-Jones's feeling increased, and she became an essential part of his life." And this is sort of really underlined when you contrast it with the pencil portraits that he was making of her almost at the same time. Here we have beautiful pencil portrait made in 1893. And there is a dedication to her. You can just about see it in this slightly fuzzy photograph. And he's made her so much younger. She's simply dressed. He's made this portrait sort of timeless, whereas the previous one, it's dated in fashion. It's very like the photograph in that it's this photograph I'm referring to, this photograph. I think if we just look at that for a minute and then compare it to this, it's so like, he hasn't taken away anything, but he has made her look 20 years younger. She does look like a teen or a very young 20-something. And that's how he saw her, I think. The contrast as well about his relationship and feeling for it is further underlined when you look at the cartoons that he was including in his letters to her, and how he imagined her going about her everyday life. She's long-limbed, she's happy, industrious at her sewing. It's this project that she's actually embroidering is something that they developed together. It's a replica. It does exist, actually. We've got photographs of it on the catalogue raisonné. It's a coverlet worked in sort of gold thread, and it's a reproduction of an ancient one that they'd seen on a visit together to a London museum. But here she is. She's young, slim, barefoot, carefree. And this lovely bubble bath cartoon is particularly interesting from my point of view, because the drapes around the bath are very, very like drawings in what we call the Secret Book of Designs. And this was a sketchbook that Burne-Jones had just for himself. And he would work out lots and lots of drawings, schemas, subjects that were just in his mind, in his imagination. There's a sort of Arthurian things, there's medieval knights, there are dark demonic angels coming and taking people away. Medea appears in there, and we have sort of knights and naked men in these kind of draped areas, and these heavy drapes appear quite often as backdrops in his paintings. There's a lot of them in this sketchbook. There's also a very strange drawing filled with bubbles in there as well, which is a bit of a mystery. My father and I are still kind of working out where that comes from and what it's about. But here's May in a draped bath with bubbles. Perhaps that's a clue what was going on in his mind at that time. But also you'll see the fountains that are refilling her bath. They're lion's heads. And that lion's head fountain appears in lots and lots of his artworks. This one on the right is a version of Cupid discovering Psyche. And you'll see the fountain pouring water into the pool that she's asleep beside. His ciphers and devices in paintings being transferred into his vision of May's life. As he got to know her and her family, he became completely charmed. Obviously with May, he could not get to know the two daughters. And here we have a beautiful photograph of Amy and the much younger Daphne. Amy's 18, 19 in this photograph, around the date of the famous portrait he was going to paint. And little Daphne, who, as you know, he wrote the most whimsical letters to with bad spelling so that she wouldn't feel alone if she was troubling with her letters. And they're a joy to read, and they have lots of lovely whimsical cartoons in. Now, this correspondence that Burne-Jones developed with May would run to 5 or 6 letters a day. It became the norm. Can you imagine the intensity of that? Missives arriving all the time. He pinned his letters to his easel and wrote while he painted. They shed such deep intimacy, with him declaring his love repeatedly. I mean, it's quite overwhelming when you read them. It's very, very touching. But somehow by 1893, he'd begun work on a second portrait, and this time of Amy, May's daughter. She first came to sit with him with her mother. Her mother accompanied her, and this was obviously an excuse for them to spend time together. But then I think May, if I remember rightly in Jocelyn's book, that May went away. She probably was suffering some ill health, and Amy started attending these sittings on her own. And Burne-Jones really liked her. He was charmed by it, and he wrote to her mother to say so. Now, I would like to give you a minute or two just to take in this portrait. I've kind of just thrown it at you. This is possibly one of the most mysterious portraits of the 19th century. It's very dark. It's an essay in greys and blacks. I'll just give you a minute just to scan over and let your eye adjust to the darkness of the painting. You'll see here is Amy. She sat calmly, looking to the left, her hands in her lap, and it's a pure profile. It's lit slightly from top left. She's wearing a black dress against a black background, so that her luminous skin is framed by her dark hair, which is held neatly at the back of her head in a simple chignon. As I said, she's about 19 and about to embark on her life in adult society. It's an essay in tones of black, purple and grey. This lecture isn't really going to analyse Victorian portraiture, just to say that it just says this meeting's been graded by the host and includes unlimited minutes. I hope that hasn't interrupted, but I'm going to continue. It's incredibly restrained, I think, especially when you know that the artist was passionately in love with her mother. There's a kind of a disconnect there, which is incredibly interesting. Burne-Jones was the master of restraint. I mean, I have a theory that this stems from his early conversations with Ruskin. John Ruskin took Burne-Jones under his wing very early on in his career, and he warned against the sensational and the visceral and the public's craving for extreme demonstrations of passion and violence. And so Burne-Jones kind of took this to heart, and you'll see in his paintings that he very often depicts the moment before an event, the stillness, or the quietude after an event. And that's a quite marked sort of mode that Burne-Jones operates within. There are exceptions. There are very graphic fights, like Perseus battling the monster in the Perseus series. But there are other moments that are still and quiet. And that's something that people often remark about Burne-Jones. So what I'd like to make just a little observation here. I'm going to move you forward and compare the two portraits. What struck me straight away was that they're almost dressed identically. The dress is so similar. They would have dressed according to the artist's instruction. This is quite deliberate. It's a very, very conscious move, and there are lots of similarities. The tight corseting, the dark somber colour. I don't believe either of them were in mourning. You have that little open sort of pleated section just across the bust, the little high lacy collar. May's obviously wearing a white scarf around her neck, and there's a little bit of white frill, but it's very much the same saying. The sleeves are the same. I think it's the same dress. Just bear that in mind, because also Burne-Jones knew the pain of losing a daughter to marriage or society. They would be moving out of the sphere of the home, and he went through agonies when his own daughter Margaret married in 1887. I mean, it was the most extreme anguish, and he writes about it. So what better way than to show his love for May than by immortalizing a daughter in oils, so that she could always be with her and take her with her from home to home. He painted many portraits of his daughter Margaret, but none of them are as striking as this one of Amy. And I think the costume is a clue to the psychology of the portrait. I wonder here, and I may be wrong, but I'd like you to think about it, whether Burne-Jones is actually, in fact, reimagining Amy as her mother when her mother was that age? Is he painting May as he saw May as a young woman in the first flush of youth? We know that Burne-Jones believed that in making his art was a reality. It was an intellectual realm. It was a beautiful world all of his own. It was as real to him as any daily occurrence. We have wonderful cartoons of him trying to get into his own paintings and failing and landing with a bump on the other side. He also, we know, at the end of his life, while he was painting his masterwork, this is a detail. This is the central section from a painting called The Last Sleep of the Arthur in Avalon. And here is King Arthur, surrounded by the weeping queens and musicians waiting for him to be called back to life. We know Burne-Jones says he went to sleep in the same position as Arthur. He'd prop himself up on pillows so that he would lie in the same position as his hero. And this really is a self-portrait. If you look at that face, it's very, very, very like Burne-Jones. He was painting himself into his own paintings. Back to this photograph, I'd like to draw your attention to the Magi. And the Magi stood immediately behind Burne-Jones. There he is again. Those hollow cheeks, the shape of the nose, the brow, that neatly clipped beard. It's a self-portrait. He's painted himself as one of the Magi. He's in his paintings. And he wrote to May and invited her into this world. It's incredibly touching, but you see this kind of the strength of feeling he has about his fantasy world being real and inviting her into it. Like other muses, May does appear in Burne-Jones's later work. He doesn't obsessively draw her like he did when he was younger with Maria and with Frances. We do have pencil portraits, and as Jocelyn Dimbleby states, she modelled for one of the watchers in Arthur in Avalon, so he painted her into his masterwork, the painting that he worked on for the last almost 20 years of his life and that was working on the day before he died. And also, she's one of the attendants in the Procession of Psyche. This is a late reworking of the subject. Now, I've scoured this, and I would suggest that May is the lead attendant. So if you look at the figure on the right, you can see a similarity between the photograph and that portrait where she's in profile. Could be her. I think it's the nearest one to her. But also, this yellow drawing, this is most unusual, and we recognize May with her curly hair, and this drawing belonged to May, and she's styled as one of the maidens for his very famous painting, The Golden Stairs. Now, this has a bevy of beautiful young women, including one of the Morris daughters. She's playing the violin, and Frances Horner playing the cymbals at the bottom of the stairs. And this is in the 1870s, because he didn't know May then. And I would like to just quote, again, show you my father's interpretation of this drawing. Lacking any information, I would like to suggest a conjectural explanation of this unusual drawing. It is as follows: a portrait of Helen Mary Gaskell as she might have appeared as one of the subjects in The Golden Stairs. The galaxy of maidens who Burne-Jones had surrounded himself with in the 1870s did not include Helen Mary, and so it suggested that he has light-heartedly drawn her how she might have appeared. This explanation is proposed by the work being gold on gold, a reference to the painting. And you can see she has a very, very similar gown. The position of her feet, she's on a stair, the golden stairs, and she's painted in gold. Just as a summing up postscript, we also have other drawings of Amy. Here we have her. Sorry, they're slightly out of focus. The one on the left is lost. We don't know where its current whereabouts is, but it appears in a magazine around 1900, And it's a variant study for the portrait. It's taken from slightly above, and you can see it's very distinctive. It has that same profile, hairstyle, that very defined little chin, that wonderfully shaped nose of hers. And again, it's a variant of the sitter. The red chalk drawing is also fascinating, identified as May, dedicated to LJB or LBJ. And this was also in Helen Mary's collection at her death. Now, it can't have been given to Helen Mary by the artist, as he would have dedicated it to it. It would have had HMG on it. Because we know this because he gifted so many works of it, and I will outline this in the next two illustrations. So I wonder, was this a gift to a member of Amy's friends or Amy's marital family? She married into the Bonham family. She married George Lionel Bonham in 1898. B. Bonham. And when I saw LB, I thought, oh, he gave it to Lionel, but the J throws that out because he was G, so it's not that, sadly. Amy's marriage wasn't successful to George Lionel. They did starting spending a lot of time apart. He on his military postings, and she followed her wanderlust to the east, spent a lot of time in Ceylon. And very sadly, he died young abroad, and she came back to England to unite with his body. And whilst she was mourning that, she died very soon after her return to England in 1910. It was a tragic loss. May never recovered and mourned the loss of her daughter for the rest of her life. Her beloved eldest, beautiful, adventurous Amy. So it's possible that the original recipient of this drawing knew May, knew of the loss of Amy, knew of her relationship, friendship with Burne-Jones, and presented this drawing to her. We don't know anything other than that really in its history, but we know that Amy had it in her possession when she died. So to sum up and to finish, Burne-Jones and May wrote to and loved each other for the last 6 years of his life, before he died in 1898. The discovery of the letters by Jocelyn Dimbleby serves not only to reveal the true depth and nature of the relationship that would only been hinted at, this profound secret that they had, it gives us also an unbelievably revealing insight into the artist's internal life, and it allows us possibly a slightly more accurate interpretation of one of the most mysterious and beautiful portraits that was produced in the 19th century. So here we have Helen Mary Gaskell on the left and on the right, paintings given to her, drawings given to her, dedicated to her, with her initials signed by EBJ and dated, but also you'll notice there is a flourish of an olive branch through the signature and the dedication. And this is incredibly special because this is a secret language that Burne-Jones used to his most intimate friends. And it meant that the gift was very special and sent with love, and that the recipient was incredibly important to him. And the fact that these olive branches are so ebullient demonstrates his affection and love for Helen Mary. She really was undoubtedly the angel at his window into that magic world of his. And there we have it. That's my whistle-stop tour into a very deep and touching relationship.
Fantastic.
Very much for listening. I'd like to say that if anybody has any questions, obviously it's a huge subject. Any questions, please do forward them to Holly, and my father and myself and Peter will try and answer them if we can.
We're so happy to have had you, and I imagine there will be lots of questions, and that you will be receiving streams of emails from us and in attendance today. So thank you. Please thank your father also.
Of course. It's one of those things when you find a new thing, and of course Jocelyn, the cachet that she
Yeah.
found. I mean, the paintbrushes that actually made that painting. It is like time travel.
Yeah.
It is looking through a window. And when I read A Profound Secret, I was excited turning the pages, and that must have been exactly how Jocelyn felt. But yes, a secret into Burne-Jones's later years. Incredible, absolutely incredible.
Thank you so much.